Welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the news report for day 306 of the war in Ukraine. You are listening to The Account. Today we will go over some official updates regarding the situation in Kreminna during the Flashpoint segment, and after we will take a look at the incredible second attack on the Engels-2 Airbase last night. As for the other minor updates, I grouped them as usual into the situation in Ukraine, the occupied territories and the international developments. But as always, we start with the flashpoints along the front. Kreminna. The situation here seems to be escalating. Russian military command reportedly has relocated to Russian. This could probably explain reports suggesting Russia is retreating over the Kreminna River. So far, no panic in Russian telegram channels can be observed, which means the situation is critical, but Russia is still holding Kreminna firmly to a degree. We will probably have to deal with a lot of confusing information here for a while. And now for a little bit more official report on the situation. Luhansk Oblast Governor Serhiy Haidai said fighting is still ongoing and troops are stationed within 20 kilometers of Kreminna. Reports of liberation or units moving into the city are not true, according to him. Haidai further stated that Russian plans to attack towards Liman were thwarted by Ukrainian forces. He also mentioned that Russian command was moved out of Kreminna. Bakhmut. Reports of further positional losses of the Russian army around the settlement, while reports allege Ukraine has started to push into Ivanrad. Over the past day, there were 28 battles and 225 artillery strikes on Bakhmut. The armed forces of Ukraine further stated that there are no signs of an operational pause yet. However, Russia has suffered serious losses and cannot maintain the pace. Dnipro River. Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups have tried crossing the Dnipro River near Kherson, but were discovered and eliminated. And now for a look at the attack on the Engels-2 Airbase in Russia. Last night, air raid sirens sounded over the Engels-1 Airbase in Saratov Oblast. The airbase is located some 700 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. Surveillance cameras captured a flash of light and the sound of an explosion. Yuri Inat, Air Force spokesman, called the explosion a simple consequence of Russian aggression. If the Russians thought that the war would not affect them deep in the rear, they were wrong, added Inat. Engels Airfield is home to Russia's fleet of strategic bombers and was already attacked once on December 5th by a Ukrainian UAV, which the UK Ministry of Defense called some of the most strategically significant failures of Russian force protection. Later today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation urged residents to remain calm and said air defense shot down a Ukrainian UAV, but the falling debris killed 3 soldiers and wounding 4. However, Baza Telegram channel reported that following the explosion a fire broke out, which covered 120 square meters. So far, there is no information about what exploded, where, and what the damage was. Later today, videos were shared on social media showing the air raid sirens sounding again over Engels. We are waiting for information. Before we start with the regular news updates, I want to point out this article by the Ukrainska Pravda. It is titled "Threat at 200 meters away: How the border with Belarus is being fortified." Are they waiting for Lukashenko's command to conduct offensive? Ukraine is surrounded by two neighboring authoritarian enemy regimes. Although Belarusians were on friendly terms with Ukraine for a long time, the country's leader decided to join Russia's aggression. We can find weekly news about the situation in Belarus and the threat it could pose to Ukraine. Journalists of the Ukrainska Pravda visited the 0 kilometer of the Belarusian border. They share what is happening there and whether the military envisions a threat of breakthrough and what they think about the Belarusians. I highly recommend checking out this article. And now the latest news updates out of Ukraine. The Center for Strategic Communication and Information Security released the top 10 Ukrainian victories for the 10th month of the war. First, preserved statehood. Second, liberation of Ukrainian territories. Third, destroying the myth of the invincibility of the world's second strongest army. Fourth, strong international support for Ukraine and isolation of Russia. Fifth, actualization of the issue of liberating Crimea. Sixth, activation of Euro-Atlantic integration. Seventh, effective communication. Eighth, powerful volunteer movement. Ninth, resistance movement in the occupied territories. And 10th, unity of the Ukrainian people. Over the past week, Russian forces attacked Zaporizhzhia Oblast 590 times. About 150 buildings were destroyed, including a school and critical infrastructure. While some have been repaired already, others will take months. According to the head of the Joint Press Center of the Southern Defense Forces, Nataliya Humeniuk, Russia is once again preparing a major missile strike on Ukraine. While Ukraine is ready for any attack, the threat of damage to critical infrastructure remains. Humeniuk further commented on the situation along the front, saying that Ukrainian forces are gradually pushing Russian forces back and try to prevent them from pulling up reserves. She said, "We establish fire control, try to stop their logistics supplies, do not let them rest, and force them to constantly look for new locations." Kirill Budanov, head of Ukraine's intelligence directorate, said Ukraine will need to use force to take back Crimea. "But nothing will happen without force. Our units will go there with weapons in hand," said Budanov. He further noted that he does not expect many changes over winter, as Russia appears to be at a dead end. Moving on to the latest developments in the occupied territories. According to the National Resistance Center, Russia is planning to create a propaganda training center in Berdiansk. The occupation authorities want to offer express courses for training teachers aligned with Russian doctrine. The occupied territories experience a major shortage of teachers, as those sent from the Russian Federation tend to not stay due to the fact they cannot be sure the region will be part of Russia in the future. The Luhansk Oblast Military Administration reports that the Russian army is wary of a possible advance by Ukrainian forces. For that reason, only one pontoon bridge over the Siverskyi Donets River is operated. Yevhen Yerin, the spokesman of the defense forces of the Tavria region, stated during an interview that Russia is moving reserve forces to the occupied areas of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. There is no need for concern, however, as no significant reinforcement of the Russian army can be observed, and therefore a possible offensive is unlikely. And to wrap up the news segment, here are the latest international developments. The main concern for Russians this year was the war in Ukraine. Anxiety has doubled over the special military operation, according to a poll. The three main fears of Russians this year were the war, inflation, mobilization. In its daily assessment, the Institute for the Study of War writes about a deal between Vladimir Putin and Yevgeny Prigozhin to nationalize properties and wealth of Russian oligarchs to finance the war. While attending a funeral for a fallen Wagner mercenary, Prigozhin said that luxury items and properties should be confiscated from those who do not support the war against Ukraine. Putin also indirectly criticized Russian oligarchs, saying that Russians who pump money from abroad and have no connection with the country are a danger to Russia. Russia is facing a major shortage of ammunition and is trying to source supplies from all over the world. According to Kirill Budanov, head of Ukraine's intelligence directorate, Russia is especially lacking 122 and 152 mm shells, tank high explosive shells, and Grad missiles. And now for a quick update from Twitter. Apparently, several military helicopters were spotted in the skies over Moscow. The reason is currently unknown. If we learn anything, we will update. And now for the daily intelligence updates, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. Russian forces have largely focused on constructing defensive positions along many sections of the front line in Ukraine since October. This includes laying additional fields of anti-tank and anti-personnel mines, almost certainly going beyond Russian doctrinal guidelines. Minefields only present an effective obstacle for trained troops if covered by observation and fire. A major challenge for the Russian forces will likely be a shortage of surveillance assets and trained personnel to effectively monitor large areas of the new minefields. And finally, the evening report by the General Staff of Ukraine. The occupiers continue to focus their efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Bakhmut and Liman areas. In the Kupiansk, Avdiivka and Zaporizhzhia areas, they are trying to improve their tactical positions. The enemy is defending in the Novopavlovsk and Kherson directions. On December 24th, the defense forces struck the area where the enemy's manpower was concentrated near the Polovinkino-Starobil district of the Luhansk region. The occupiers lost up to 150 soldiers dead and wounded. On December 25th, in the temporarily occupied territory of the Kherson region, the invaders lost up to 50 servicemen killed and up to 100 wounded. About 5 units of military equipment of various types were also destroyed. The enemy continues to use the network of civilian healthcare facilities in the temporarily occupied territory to treat wounded servicemen of the Russian occupation forces and mercenaries of private military companies. Thus, in the village of Bilovodsk, Starobil district, Luhansk region, up to 300 wounded representatives of the Wagner PMC are being treated. In addition, in Permovaisk, on the territory of the so-called military hospital, deployed on the basis of a multidisciplinary lyceum, up to 300 occupiers who were injured in the area of the city of Bakhmut are also being treated. In the settlement of Tokmak, Zaporizhzhia region, the Russian invaders intensified administrative and police measures. Military personnel, together with local collaborators, search for patriotic Ukrainian citizens, check personal laptops and phones, and search residences. And that wraps up another one of our news reports. If you're interested in reading up on any of the articles I mentioned, you can find links to them in the description as always. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.